Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare. Jai Radha Gopinath, Radha Gopinath, Shri Radhe. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramamsa Parivrajacharya Shri Srimad Divine Grace Abhay Charanarvinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramamsa Parivrajacharya Shri Srimad Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. Samaveta Gaur Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. Jai Nitai Gaur Premanande. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. This morning we are reading from Canto 3. Chapter 4, Vidura approaches Maitreya, text 23. Please repeat. Shri Shuka Uvacha Ityuddhavad Upakarnya Suradham Dusaham Vadam Jnanenashramayat Kshatta Shokam Utpatitam Buddha. So, go to translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Translation. Sri Shukadev Goswami said, after hearing from Uddhava all about the annihilation of his friends and relatives, the learned Vidura pacified his overwhelming bereavement by dint of his transcendental knowledge. Purport. Vidura was informed that the result of the battle of Kurukshetra was the annihilation of his friends and relatives, as well as the destruction of the Yadu dynasty and also the passing away of the Lord. All these hurled him into bereavement for the time being. But because he was highly advanced in transcendental knowledge, he was quite competent to pacify himself by enlightenment. As it is stated in Bhagavad Gita, due to our long association with bodily relationships, bereavement on account of the annihilation of friends and relatives is not at all astonishing, but one has to learn the art of subduing such bereavement with higher transcendental knowledge. The talks between Uddhava and Vidura on the topic of Krishna began at sunset, and Vidura was now further advanced in knowledge due to his association with Uddhava. Translation again. Sri Shukadev Goswami said, after hearing from Uddhava all about the annihilation of his friends and relatives, the learned Vidura pacified his overwhelming bereavement by dint of his transcendental knowledge. Om Jnana Timrandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha. He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpaturubhyasya Kripa Sindhu Bhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So here we're talking about transcendental knowledge and its effects. Of course, there's only positive effects. This reminds me of the end of chapter 4 of the Bhagavad Gita. Venugada Prabhu was recently speaking of one verse, one of the advantages of transcendental knowledge. Apichetasi papebhya sarvebhya papakritama sarvam jnana plavaneva vijanam santarishasi. So if one is the most sinful person, he can cross the ocean of miseries, this mature world, by dint of boarding the boat of transcendental knowledge. One can burn the reactions of sinful life by transcendental knowledge. Basmasad kurute tata. And the other verse is Yaj gyatva na punarmoham evam yasyasi pandava Yena drikshasi atmani atomai. Krishna says that when you get transcendental knowledge, you'll never again fall into illusion. You'll see everything in relation to me, and you'll see all living entities. They're within me, they have an eternal connection with me. And the result of that, nahi jnanena sadrisham pavitram iha vidyate tat swayam yoga samsiddhi kalinatmani vindati. So what that verse is saying is that when one cultivates spiritual knowledge, transcendental knowledge, seeing everything in relation to Krishna, then gradually over a period of time, this knowledge matures within himself. Through applying this knowledge repeatedly in the practice of practicing Krishna consciousness, then one gets realization. And through that realization, then one feels ever increasing bliss and joy. So here we see a practical example of this. Even though Vidura is learning about the entire annihilation of the Yadu dynasty, Krishna is also about to leave as well. His guru Uddhava, in this case, he's about to depart for Badrikashram as well. So it's a cause for great bereavement. We see when a great Vaishnav leaves, everyone is lamenting. Everyone is joyful because the Vaishnav is attaining eternal service of Radha Krishna. But at the same time, we who are left behind here in this mature world are bereft of their association. But through transcendental knowledge, we can pacify ourselves. And that's the reason why Krishna somewhat corrects Arjuna right at the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita. Ashochanan vashochasvam pragyavadam shabashase. You're speaking learned words, but you should know, Arjuna, that the wise actually lament neither for the living nor for the dead. So Uddhava has come, Uddhava actually came to the spot. He left Dwarka as soon as Krishna left Dwarka, and he also went to Prabhas Kshetra as well, following Krishna. Then, as we know, he sees Krishna curled up against a little young banyan tree. Krishna is relaxing there with his legs folded on top of each other, and the annihilation of the imminent annihilation of the Yadu dynasty is about to take place. And at that time, Uddhava comes and he approaches him. And it's explained that Uddhava got this special favor of, again, associating with Krishna by dint of his pure devotional service to Krishna. On the other hand, Maitreya, who comes upon the scene, he's coming there because of his agyata sukriti. So he's done some sort of devotional piety. Ganesham Prabhu was explaining that Maitreya is not he's a Mahabhagavat, but he's not a pure devotee like Uddhava. His bhakti is tinged with gyan, or the impersonal conception. So he comes there as well. And he learns this knowledge. And one way in which Krishna supremely, like in this case we see that Krishna is bestowing his topmost grace upon Uddhava by instructing him one more time. He did so previous to the annihilation of the Yadu dynasty, where the Uddhava Gita is spoken in the 11th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, in Dwarka itself. But here again he's instructing Uddhava in Prabhasa Kshetra. And previously, if we remember back, Krishna also bestowed the amazing opportunity to Uddhava to actually see the topmost result of transcendental knowledge, developing transcendental knowledge and love for Krishna. That we see in the morning when we chant Hare Krishna, we say the ultimate purpose of chanting Hare Krishna is to develop love for Krishna. So this is exemplified in its topmost way by the residents of Vrindavan. And this Braja Bhakti, or pure love for Krishna, is a very difficult thing to understand theoretically. It has to be seen in the demonstration of the devotees who have this. So that's why Uddhava is sent by Krishna to Vrindavan to see this love that the Brajabasis have for Krishna. So it's explained that when Uddhava is coming, actually here Srila Prabhupada is explaining that this conversation between Uddhava and Vidura, it started in the sunset as well, towards the evening. So same way, Uddhava mounted a chariot in Dwarka, and Krishna gave him a letter to pacify the residents of Vrindavan, saying that yes, I'm just coming, I will come back very soon. And then he leaves Dwarka and he comes to Vrindavan, and he's also coming at sunset as well. He's entering Vrindavan in sunset as well. And a very nice description of Vrindavan is given, that as he's entering Vrindavan, he hears the sounds of the bulls in Rat who are chasing after the female cows. There's scenes of white baby calves jumping hither and thither. There's sounds of bangles tinkling against each other as the Brajabasis are working hard, churning yogurt into butter. And so many other things are there as well. Uddhava sees nice bowers and groves in Vrindavan. He sees nice, pristine, clear lakes with lotus flowers inside as well. And the Acharyas explain that even though at that point in time, because Krishna had left Vrindavan, Vrindavan was actually submerged in an ocean of lamentation. We see that those which are actually moving living entities, they actually are still. And those which are still, they're actually moving. So Vrindavan, Mother Yashoda, the gopis, Nanda Maharaj, actually they were all inert. They could not perform their daily duties. But that particular part of Vrindavan where Uddhava was entering was actually covered by the internal potency of Krishna, so that Uddhava could actually see the natural beauty and the natural happenings of Vrindavan. So that part of Vrindavan that Uddhava was entering was not overcome by the lamentation of separation from Krishna. And Uddhava's realizations there, by the grace of Krishna, his friend, are twofold. Srila Rupa Goswami gives a really nice verse towards the end of Nectar Instruction. Vaikuntha janito vara mudupuri tatra pirasotsavad vrindaranya mudara paniramanat tatrapi govardhana radha kundamihapi gokulapate premamrita plavanat kuryadasya virajato giritate sevam viveki naka. So in Srimad Bhagavatam, that part of Srimad Bhagavatam, it's explained that Uddhava spent several months in Vrindavan itself with the Brajabasis, learning and seeing and delighting in their mood of pure devotional service to Krishna, especially in separation from Krishna. And here his realization is a gradation of the different dhams of Krishna. Higher than the dham of Vaikuntha, where everyone sees Krishna in a mood of awe and reverence, or Narayan in a mood of awe and reverence, is that of Dwarka. But higher than Dwarka is Mathura, Mathurapuri, Vaikuntha Janito Vara Madhupuri. Now, in one sense, Dwarka and Mathura are the same, because as we learn in Krishna book, Krishna transported the residents of Mathura to Dwarka upon the imminent attack of both Jarasandha and Kalayavana. But there's one difference, at least, that we can see. In Mathura, Krishna is known as Devaki Nandan. He's the son, he's a prince. He's the son of the great Kshatriya, Vasudev, and his wife Devaki. He's the grandson of Shurasen, the king of the Yadus. But he's still a bachelor. And therefore, the dealings of some of the devotees in Mathura are still on an informal platform with Krishna. For example, we see, at least in the Bhauma Lila, in the Krishna book, we see that the washerman chastised Krishna. He didn't want to give fresh clothes to Krishna. Another informal dealing with Krishna that we see in Mathura Lila is that of Kubja. So Kubja wanted to have an intimate relationship with Krishna. But we don't see such dealings in Dwarka, where Krishna is a great mighty king. He's a great ruler. He's constructed palaces and parks. The assembly hall is there. Sudharma assembly hall is there in Dwarka. And he's married to 16,108 princesses. So the mood in Dwarka compared to Mathurapuri is a bit more in awe and reverence, because Krishna has assumed officially that position as king of Dwarka, whereas in Mathura he hasn't yet. Rupa Goswami explains that higher than Mathurapuri is that of Vrindavan. And then he sort of breaks it down a little bit. Higher than Vrindavan is Govardhan Hill, higher than Govardhan Hill is Radhakund. And Uddhava, as he's actually the way he actually inculcates the mood of the Brajbasis is that he actually sees and realizes that the land of Vrindavan is constructed in such a way, it's created by Krishna in such a way that everything which is there is completely natural, and everything can be directly connected with Krishna. So Uddhava used to travel through the forests with the Brajbasis, and he used to point at different places. He used to point at Govardhan Hill, and he used to inquire from the Brajbasis. So what happened here? And when he would inquire like that, the residents of Vrindavan, they would be submerged into ecstasy, remembering the Krishna's pastimes of lifting Govardhan Hill, and they would explain these pastimes to Uddhava. Or he would point to some grove in Vrindavan, he would point to the Yamuna river, and the residents of Vrindavan would remember Kalya Lila, and they would explain all these Leelas to Uddhava. So the first realization that Uddhava gets is that compared to any other dham, including Dwarka, because Dwarka is like a city, whereas Vrindavan is completely natural. Everything in Vrindavan is conducive for remembering Krishna, especially. So he saw that realization in Vrindavan itself, so the land. The other realization that Uddhava gets is with the devotees themselves. So the other verse given by Rupa Goswami, just after that, is about a gradation of devotees. Higher than the karmis, karmi bhya parito harepriyataya vyaktim yayur jnaninas. Higher than the karmis, those fruitive workers, are the jnanis who realize that actually fruitive results are futile, therefore let me stop working. And such a jnani, afterwards, who takes to bhakti, tebhyo jnana vimukta bhakta parama premeka nishtastata. Higher than a jnani is a bhakta. Higher than a bhakta, an ordinary bhakta, is that bhakta who has reached nishtha. Tebhyo ta pashupala pankaja drishas tabhyopi saradhika. Out of all such pure devotees who have reached firm, fixed devotion to Krishna, are the gopis, and out of the gopis, Srimati Radharani is the topmost. So he practically sees that in Vrindavan, especially when he approaches the gopis and then he starts reading to them the message of Krishna. But one particular gopi, Srimati Radharani, she goes by herself somewhere at a distance and she sees the bee and she considers that this bee is a messenger sent by Krishna. And then she, as we know in Krishna book, if you read, Bhagavatam if you read, she goes into the greatest ecstasy, Mahabhava. So that's the other realization that Uddhava gets. And Ganesham Prabhu was recently explaining that because of this, Uddhava desires and he prays to be born as a creeper, a herb in Vrindavan. Gulma, Lata, Aushadhi. So that the residents of Vrindavan, as they travel through Vrindavan glorifying Krishna, they will trample on him and he'll get the dust of their lotus feet, so that he aspires to also become just like them. He also explains that these gopis in Vrindavan, even though they're simple cowherd girls, they don't seemingly have a Vedic education like that which Krishna and Balaram got through Sandipani Muni. Still, they have reached the highest ecstasy of love of Godhead. So Uddhava says, then what's the point in aspiring to be Lord Brahma or even a highly educated Brahmana? There's no point in aspiring for such materially, you can say, advantageous situations, because these are actually not needed to advance in devotional service. One can be very simple, just like we see Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he saw that illiterate Brahmana. So Krishna is bhavagrahi Janardana. He sees the mood. He doesn't see what skills you have or what you're offering so much. He sees the condition of your heart. So that's what he saw in the residents of Vrindavan. And also it's explained, there's a nice verse in Uddhava's prayers where he explains two seemingly different points which juxtapose each other, which differentiate each other. He says, first of all, in the first line, he says, Vyabhichari Dushta. The relationship between Krishna and the gopis was seemingly, apparently, morally improper. Right? Unmarried young girls and boys dancing in the middle of the night together. But in the very next line, Uddhava says, Paramatmani Rura Bhava. Even though their behavior was seemingly inappropriate, still their love for the Supreme Personality of Godhead far outweighs that. And Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur gives 3 examples of amorous lovers in that purport. He says that one amorous lover is someone who gives up their relationship with their spouse and simply gives up their relationship, their dedication, their faith with their spouse, and also has no particular fixed relationship with their paramour. So they just engage in a relationship with their paramour and their spouse just so that they can enjoy. This is considered to be most condemnable. The next type of amorous lover that the Acharya explains is one who gives up their faith and their dedication to their spouse, but then cultivates a relationship with their paramour. And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains that at least this particular person has the good quality, if you want to call it a good quality, of at least dedicating themselves to someone. It may not be their lawfully wedded spouse, but it's at least their paramour. But the highest type of amorous lover, who is one who gives up at least in an internal sense, not in an external sense, but in an internal sense, in a Krishna conscious sense, gives up their attachment, their material attachments to their spouse and even their paramour, if they have one, and simply dedicates themselves to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Such a person is considered to be the greatest amorous lover. So the gopis in Vrindavan fall into that category. And we see other examples of that in the Shastra as well. We see the example of Raghunath Das Goswami, whom Lord Chaitanya instructed that you should live in a family life, but internally you should cultivate detachment and should cultivate an attachment to eventually go and join Lord Chaitanya's Sankirtan movement. We see that in the case of Srila Prabhupada as well, who eventually took sannyas and then dedicated himself, at least this time, externally. Srila Prabhupada was always dedicated to the cause of Lord Chaitanya, but then he took sannyas and then he was more free to preach Krishna consciousness. He started his Back to Godhead magazine, etc. He got the opportunity to travel to the West and start the Krishna consciousness movement. So without the blessings of Krishna, without the blessings of Krishna's representative, the Guru, the bona fide spiritual master, it's very difficult to acquire transcendental knowledge. Just yesterday when we finished book distribution, we went to a nearby shopping center briefly, and then we were coming back to get into the car, and I bumped into an old friend of mine. In fact, his face is just the same. His face hasn't changed yet. I used to study with him in year 6 actually. We used to go to pre-uni, like a coaching college together, in order to pass the selective exam in year 6 and get into a really good high school, a selective high school. So since then I was with him. We were in the same high school together, the same grade, and we were in the same university as well. But when we get to university, he chose science and I chose engineering, so we sort of split up. But I still remembered him. So as I was walking past, I saw his face and I asked him, "Hey, are you Shivansh?" I said, "Yeah, I'm Shivansh." I said, "Do you remember me?" He said, "No." So, I'm Tejas. You remember me? I'm Tejas from Giraween High School. "Oh wow, you've changed, So I told him I'm a monk and this and that. He was really, really into science. He's a really philosophical guy, materially extremely brilliant, very smart. I remember in high school, every morning before we used to start our classes at 9 o'clock, that's when the bell used to ring in the morning, and then we used to go for the morning assembly, and then we would go to our classes. But before that, we would come to high school a bit earlier. But at 8 o'clock, we would come to the high school. And for that 1 hour before the bell rang, we would all, me and him and a couple of other guys, we would all go to the library, and we would go to the science section of the library, and there would be these books on quantum mechanics and astrology and cosmology and all these different things. So we would discuss these theories, the theory of light and the speed of light and quarks and bosons and all these sort of things. So he's materially very intelligent. However, he was telling me that recently he's reading a lot of books on consciousness, and he was explaining to me that he's still trying to understand what is consciousness. I was just hearing, I didn't say anything, I was just hearing, because he said that he would like to catch up and, like that. So I was just hearing him out. So I was just hearing him, and he was explaining that one thing is that, one of the conclusions that he's coming to is that consciousness is either illusory, or as Srila Prabhupada explains in his purports to the 2nd chapter of Bhagavad Gita, it is born with matter and it dies with matter. And this is exactly what he was saying. And I thought, wow, Srila Prabhupada is dead accurate when he's writing his Bhaktivedanta purports. This is exactly what the conclusions the materialists are coming to. That consciousness is created when matter is created, and consciousness also dies when matter is destroyed as well, when death takes place. And he's saying, or matter must be, or consciousness must be an illusory concept. So I just kept quiet. But unless we understand this knowledge through the bona fide source, it's very difficult for us to understand what to speak of transcendental knowledge about Krishna, even material knowledge about how this world is working. What's the cause, what's the purpose? It's very difficult for us to understand this. And Uddhava, again, the topmost devotee of Krishna, Krishna's Mantri Raj in Dwarka, the topmost devotee in Dwarka, he's explaining that even Krishna, even though I'm your pure devotee, even though I have such intimate association with you, still I can't understand you as well. And out of his humility, he puts forth several points which Braja Prem Prabhu touched on, I think last week. He says that Krishna, there's some contradictions in you. Although you are completely detached from material activities, you still appear to be engaged in fruitive activities. Right? We see, for example, in Govardhan Lila. Now, if you take Govardhan Lila, before Krishna told the Brajavasis to actually worship Govardhan, they were actually originally worshipping Indra. So seemingly it's a fruitive activity, it's karma kanda. Let us worship the demigods so that we can get rain, so that we can cultivate the fields and all that sort of stuff. We can get the grains and we can live. But then Krishna explains that you should not do this, you should worship Govardhan Hill, because Govardhan Hill is the source of sustenance. It's providing you with jewels and minerals and all these different things, fresh water, shade, all these things are there. Grazing fields for the cows. So worship Govardhan Hill instead. So it seems apparently that Krishna is promoting fruitive activities. He's not promoting the worship of the Supreme Personality of Godhead exclusively. He is Supreme Personality of Godhead. But this is apparently a contradiction. He's promoting fruitive activities, although Krishna himself is completely detached from fruitive results and work. Namam karmani limpati name karma phala spriha. As Krishna explains in the Bhagavad Gita. That's the first contradiction. The second contradiction that Uddhava puts forth to Krishna is that Krishna, although you are unborn, you appear to take birth. We see, if you read Krishna book, you'll see that Vasudeva also was astonished and amazed at Krishna's birth through the womb of his wife, Devaki as well. He explains that Krishna is, the completely unbound, he's completely the source of the universe. How can Krishna appear in the womb of my wife? How does Krishna appear fully born with jewels and a full head of hair? How is it possible? So Vasudeva also was completely amazed at Krishna's appearance as well. So this is the second contradiction he puts forth. The third one that Uddhava puts forth to Krishna is that you are completely fearless. Fear personified is scared of you. But at the same time, you run away from the battlefield. Now, one interesting thing is that, see, the reason why Krishna is Achyuta is because he's unfailing in all of his activities. And even by material estimations, if Krishna's activity is said to be denigrating, Krishna still retains his superiority. He doesn't fall down from his position. Now, we see at the beginning of Bhagavad Gita that Arjuna wanted to flee from the battlefield. He did not want to fight. But Krishna is also a Kshatriya as well. Krishna also acted as a Kshatriya. He defeated Jarasanda's army 17 times, single-handedly. And at the same time, Krishna fled away from the battlefield. He ran away from the battlefield. Not caring for his reputation. There's a verse. Akirtim chapi bhutani kata yishyanti te vayam. Krishna is explaining to Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita. He's explaining that, Arjuna, if you flee from the battlefield, all these great chieftains of the world which have gathered here to fight, they'll criticize you. The common people will criticize you. This great warrior, Yuddhe cha palayanam, one of the qualities of the Kshatriya is that he should not flee from the battlefield. But if you flee, then you'll get the infamy. But at the same time, we see that Krishna flees from the battlefield. And yet he's giving that same reason to Arjuna, that you shouldn't flee. So we see that that's why Krishna is Achyuta, because he can do something, whereas we can't do it. If we do something, then bad reputation will come to us, people will criticize us. But if Krishna does something, everyone will glorify him. Another thing, recently I was talking to Kamsari Prabhu, and he was asking me, what is the origin of illusion? Janmadi asya yatha, right? So everything comes from the Supreme. Therefore, illusion must therefore also exist in the Supreme. So I explained to him that in the material world, illusion is there in the form of Mahamaya. Mahamaya means that energy of Krishna which makes us forget Krishna. In the spiritual world, Mahamaya in her perfection is there as Yogamaya. So actually Mahamaya is, you could say, the reflection of Yogamaya. Yogamaya is the original spiritual potency, the original spiritual energy. But the residents of Vrindavan, the inhabitants of the spiritual world, especially Golok Vrindavan, they're covered by Yogamaya, and here in the material world, we're covered by Mahamaya. The function of both of these energies is to forget Krishna. In the material world, we have forgotten Krishna. In the spiritual world, the Brajabasis also don't know who Krishna is. But there's a difference. When the Vrajabasis forget Krishna, this pleases Krishna. But when we forget Krishna, it doesn't displease Krishna, but, Krishna is Atmaram, but at the same time, he feels compassionate, and it's bad for us if we forget Krishna. Just like Brahma, in Brahma Vimohan Lila. When Brahma comes, he doesn't know who Krishna is. He's under Mahamaya. Therefore, he tests Krishna, he steals the cowherd boys, and what's the result of that? At the end, he has to come and apologize to Krishna. And Krishna, it's explained that he, in his left hand, he's carrying the yogurt rice, and it's actually coming down him between the gaps in his fingers. And he's apparently not caring about what Brahma is saying. He's saying, who is this four-headed person here? I've never seen such a strange person. Why is he praying to me? So Krishna apparently doesn't care. But that's the result of Mahamaya and forgetting Krishna in that way. Right? But if those who are under the influence of Yogamaya, they forget Krishna, this pleases Krishna very much. They're assisting in Krishna's pastimes. Lilayatena bhuvanani jayati ajasram govindamadi purusham tamaham bhajami. When Mother Yashoda is seeing the entire universe through Krishna's mouth and his belly, she thinks that Krishna must be some great demigod, he must be the Supreme Personality of Godhead himself. But then, being influenced by Yogamaya, she thinks, no, it's just my little son. And this pleases Krishna. This forgetfulness pleases Krishna. So this is the other one. The fourth apparent contradiction that Uddhava places is that, Krishna, you're Atmaram. You're self-satisfied. Yet you marry and enjoy with so many queens in Dwarka. You enjoy with so many of your devotees everywhere. Why is this? This is also a contradiction as well. And finally, the most bewildering thing for Uddhava is in relation to himself. He's explaining, Krishna, you're all-knowing, all-cognizant, all-powerful, right? But at the same time, you enlisted my help to give you directives on how to fight Jarasandha when he attacked Dwarka 17 times. Krishna apparently acted as if he was bewildered, and he went up to Uddhava and he requested Uddhava to explain to him how he can go ahead and fend off this great danger of the attack of Jarasandha. So this is something which is very bewildering for Uddhava. So even a pure devotee like Uddhava is admitting out of his humility that he doesn't understand Krishna as well. So how can the materialists be so confident about the workings of this universe, what happens after death, all these sort of things? So that's why we need to cultivate transcendental knowledge through proper source. And one thing which has been repeatedly said in like last week especially, as we went through the Bhagavatam verses, and on Sunday, Bhagavata Sharya Prabhu, when he was giving, that whole purport was on the Chatur Shloki. So the Chatur Shloki is the 4 verses, the 4 seed verses of Srimad Bhagavatam, which were spoken by Krishna to Brahma. So Brahma, he was on the lotus, which was growing through the stem, coming from Krishna's navel, Garbhodakashayi's navel, Vishnu's navel, and then he couldn't see the source of the stem, where it was actually coming from. But then he heard that sound tapa, and then he started meditating on that sound for 1,000 years, and then gradually Krishna revealed himself within his heart. He actually got a complete vision of Vaikuntha. He saw the aeroplanes which are flying in Vaikuntha. He saw the bodily forms of the residents of Vaikuntha. He sees all these things. He sees a vision of Golok Vrindavan. Krishna himself comes in, shakes his hand, and then being inspired by, it says in the Brahma Samhita, being inspired by Saraswati, who is actually not really Brahma's consort, is explained in the Brahma Samhita that Goddess Saraswati, the goddess of learning, is actually originally the consort of Lord Krishna. So being inspired by her, being inspired by the Gayatri, the sound of Krishna's flute, Brahma starts to glorify Krishna through his Brahma Samhita. And the 4 seed verses are in response to Brahma's 4 questions. The first question that Brahma asks to Lord Krishna is, what is the nature of your form? And I'll also put forward the second question because they're related. Krishna, what is your form? And number 2, what is the nature of your energies? And both of these questions, the first 2 questions, relate to the Sambandha aspect of Krishna, our relationship with Krishna. Right? Krishna, what is your form? And Krishna, what is the nature of your energies? The third question, which Brahma asks to Lord Krishna, is, what is the nature of your Leela? What is the nature of Krishna Prema? So this is the ultimate prayojan. This is the ultimate goal of Krishna consciousness, to develop a love for Krishna and to engage in the loving pastimes of Krishna for his pleasure. Right? So this question, the third question Brahma asks, is related to the prayojan, the ultimate siddhanta of, the conclusive siddhanta of Krishna consciousness. And the last question, the fourth question, which Brahma puts forth to Lord Krishna is, how can I actually reach that stage of developing love for you? What is the process? And this relates to the Abhideya aspect. Abhideya refers to the process. So these Chatur Shlokis are divided into these 3 different ways. The first 2 questions relate to Sambandha, the third question relates to Prayojan, and the last question relates to Abhideya. So Krishna's answer to the first question in regard to what is the nature of your form, Krishna explains to Lord Brahma that it is I, Lord Brahma, who existed before the creation. I'm currently existing as the creation itself, and after the creation is wound up, the material creation is wound up, it is I alone who exist as well. Krishna is explaining to Lord Brahma that his form is completely independent and transcendental to the material world. In response to his second question, and that's basically a summary of what Krishna explains to Arjuna in the beginning of the 4th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita as well, where Krishna is explaining about the reason for his appearances, Sambhavami Atmamaya, the nature of his form. The second question in relation to his energies, Krishna explains a very important point. He says, whatever you see which is not connected to me, apparently which is not connected to me, know that to be a function of Maya. Actually, everything is connected to Krishna. A pure devotee sees that. As Rupa Goswami also says, Anasaktasya Vishyan yatarham upayanjita nirbandha Krishna sambandhe yuktam vairagyam uchate. A pure devotee who is able to see everything, the material energy linked to Krishna, is able to use this material energy in the service of Krishna. One who doesn't have this vision tries to renounce the material energy, thinking it's an obstacle, because he doesn't see its relationship with Krishna. That's the difference between Vairagya and Yukta Vairagya. Yukta Vairagya is on a much higher elevated platform to be able to see that, but that requires some qualification in Krishna consciousness. So he explains like that. So actually, all energies are part of me, but if apparently you see something which is not related to me, not connected to me, know that to be a function of Maya. That is my illusory energy. It actually has no real substantial existence. The third question, what is the nature of your Leela filled with prema? Krishna gives an interesting example. He gives the example of the elements, the Pancha Mahabhuta, earth, water, fire, air, and ether. He explains that although the Pancha Mahabhuta are present within the material world, within each one of the living entities' bodies, right? Our bodies are constructed with these 5 elements. At the same time, they exist independently and separately as well. Agnir mahi gaganam ambu maruddishascha kalas tatatma manasiti jagatrayani yasmad bhavanti vibhavanti vishantyam cha govindamadi purusham tamaham bhajami. All these elements are part of Krishna. Krishna is the cause of them, Krishna is the cause of maintaining them, and ultimately Krishna destroys them as well. At the same time, they exist completely independent of the bodies and the formations that they take up. So the earth element is present in our bodies, but at the same time it exists independently. We see in the covering of the universe, these elements are there existing independently of their sort of going into the different forms within the material world as well. So Krishna explains that my Leela also exists independently in the spiritual world, transcendental to this material world. But from time to time, I come and show this Leela, which is eternally going on in the spiritual world, into the material world. For what purpose? Ananda chinmaya rasatmataya manasu ya praninam pratifalam smaratam upetya. Simply to capture the minds and attract the minds of the conditioned living entities, I come from the spiritual world to demonstrate the activities of the spiritual world, to demonstrate my Leela and love for me to the residents of the material world. And the answer to the last question of how I can approach you, Krishna says to Lord Brahma, he says, therefore you should accept a spiritual master, you should inquire into the absolute truth, atata Brahma jigyasa. And I'll finish with this point. He says, if you follow these, if you fully understand my answers to these 4 questions that you've asked me, and this Chatur Shlokas which I've presented to you, then you won't be bewildered in the partial annihilation of the universe and the complete destruction of the universe as well. And that's something which relates to this verse, because this verse is also talking about the destruction of the Yadu dynasty and winding up of Krishna's pastimes. If one actually understands transcendental knowledge, the eternal nature of Krishna's Leela and one's eternal relationship with Krishna, then one is not bewildered despite the destructive element of the material world. Everything in the material world is created, maintains itself, destroyed. Avyaktadini bhutani vaktamadhyani bharata. But transcendental knowledge, as I was explaining right at the beginning of the class, kalinatmani vindati. One experiences deep joy within. So a devotee experiences material setbacks, but from internally he or she is not affected. And that's the result of transcendental knowledge. Okay, so I'll stop there. We're over time. Thank you very much.